Hello and welcome. Today's a really nice day for the Kubeflow community as we're going to review the Kubeflow version 1.6 release update and feature review. This is a presentation provided by the Kubeflow community release team along with the working groups that support us. Our agenda today is we'll go over some of the highlights. We're going to have Kubeflow user survey results, so we can show what we've been hearing from the users. We're going to talk about process and themes as we've improved Kubeflow over the years, and you'll see some of that process being defined. And then we'll dive into the feature details by the working groups and how to get involved in the Kubeflow community. From a summary standpoint, Kubeflow 1.6 provides a lot of new feature and functionality as well as working to improve operations for the end users. And in particular, Kubeflow 1.6 adds support for Kubernetes v1.22. And I think this was very important for us. We learned a lot about dependencies as well as how to upgrade to major Kubernetes releases. We know we have another one coming up as we go towards 1.25. So I think this process was good for us. And we also introducing a new alpha release of Kubeflow Pipelines V2. And I believe this sets the foundation for a lot of great new functionality in the Kubeflow community with V2 on KFP. Katib in the training operator, we have a new hyperparameter support for the population-based algorithm, and we also have a combined SDK for the distributed training operator. You'll get more details on that. You've got some pod default webhook that picks up the new certificates. I know folks have been working on that, and various notebook controller fixes, including some CVEs and updates to the container registry image hosting. And then new server runtime and ClusterServing runtime CRDs in KServe, as well as an inference server predict spec that has new model spec. And this provides a new way to specify models in KServe. You'll get a lot more details in that in a few minutes. I'm just going to go over a little bit of the user survey so we can line up why we do at Kubeflow. We try to listen to what the end users do. And here you see, once again, in our third user survey, third annual, that ML engineers tend to be the most popular people that are giving us input, then architects, data scientists, this all makes sense, and then a host of engineers of all types, DevOps, Kubernetes, data engineers. So this is great. And then when you look at the frameworks, again, TensorFlow has been the most popular with Kubeflow, Scikit, PyTorch, as well as Keras and XGBoost. We do notice that a lot of the users are also using Airflow, as well as Spark, and I believe MLflow. So those are things that we look as our roadmap. As usual, we've seen that people do have some questions about manually building pipelines and connecting data pipelines to ML pipelines, as well as converting tune models into model serving. But probably the biggest change year over year is this on model monitoring or monitoring models. We need to dive into this with the users a bit more and understand exactly what the requirements are. But this is something that we're going to address a little bit now and more as we go forward. One of the great things about Kubeflow is it allows folks to basically iterate very quickly. We've noticed from the survey that 50% of the models are basically replaced within 3 months. And the second part of this is that 75% of the models, if you add up, over 75% of the models take 5 iterations or more. So even if you have 5 models in production and you're replacing those every 90 days, right? That's 50 iterations that you're doing every 90 days. That's a lot of versions that you need to keep track of. So that's why Kubeflow has some really nice process. I think that's what helps people a lot. Another thing here is we're seeing a best-in-class set of folks where about 30% of the people, these two right here, 15%, 15%, are getting 75% of their models into production. So we've got this best-in-class folks that are getting 75% or more of their models into production. And about 50% or about half of the people are getting 50% of their models into production. that's a good sign. We still have this 30% down here that are getting 10% or less of their models in production. Now, I've spoken to some people who don't use Kubeflow to put models into production. So I don't know whether that's a gap in Kubeflow or whether that is just the way that they use Kubeflow, but we need to dive into that a bit more, and we'll be interested to hearing from users about that. And of course, in the survey, we also dive into, what are the biggest gaps in Kubeflow? And here we see folks are asking for, better documentation and tutorials, more security installation and support. And you'll see in the roadmap as we go forward, as well as in this release, that we're delivering those things. Now I'm going to hand off to one of the release team members to talk about Kubeflow's process and this release purpose. Daniela?
Sure, thanks, Josh. And hi, everyone. My name is my name is Daniela Plasencia. I am a software engineer at Canonical, and I'm also part of the release team and part of this community. In reality, this community is really composed of users, distribution, and working groups. And what we do at the release team is to understand the needs of users and distributions and communicate those to the working groups. And from the working groups to the users and distributions. This is all done to really introduce new functionality that simplifies operations and streamlines ML workflows, really. We have community contact points, of course. We have the working groups and the community meetings that you can find in this link. Of course, GitHub issues and PRs are welcome in our GitHub tracking. Feel free to put some questions in Slack by joining the Slack channel. And also you have the option to discuss something in the mailing list. Next slide, please. Right, so what have we done for the Kubeflow 1.6 update? First of all, in the release team, we had to plan and had to set up some milestones in the timeline. We had some tracking issues and a Kanban board for planning. And finally, we have been releasing release candidates as pre-releases in our GitHub. The working group releases are also a part of this update. So we have several of them, like KFP Tecton is now on version 1.2.1. KFP, as Josh mentioned already, is on 0 alpha. Notebooks are on version 1.6, sorry. KServe is 0.8, Katib is 0.14, and the training operators is 1.5. There are some important themes and features that we have. The Kubernetes 1.22 support is now out there, and also KFP 2.0. Once again, the Kubeflow and the working group roadmaps are available for you to explore. Okay, so distributions are also a very important part of our community and of our release process, as they have tested and provided feedback of the multiple release candidates that we published during this process. As you can see in this image, we have a number of distributions that support different versions of Kubeflow. And by the way, this image is a little bit old. In the following days, we will be updating that. But you can get an idea of how much support from the distributions we're getting. Also important to note is that this list is growing. So we have another distribution joining us for 1.6. And talking about Kubeflow dependency versions and tracking, this is very important, and I would like to highlight that the amount of effort that requires for the working groups and the release team to keep track of these dependencies and update them. So now we have support for Kubernetes 1.22, which is something that we have been looking forward from past releases. We now support Istio 1.14, Knative 1.4, Cert Manager 1.5, Dex 2.31, and Customize 3.2 for the ones that like to build and apply their YAML files. Now I'm going to hand off to James to talk about Kubeflow pipelines.
Thank you, Daniela. Hello, everyone. This is James Liu from Kubeflow Pipelines. So in this Kubeflow 1.6 release, we are introducing Kubeflow Pipeline V2 Alpha phase into the release. So the main topic of V2 Alpha is that we start supporting creating and running pipeline in an algo-agnostic approach. The way that we do it is to introduce a universally standard for pipeline template. So you can define the pipeline template and then you can run it everywhere. So if we deep dive into the V2 Alpha, we also have a package of new features along with it. One is on the UI, we are introducing a brand new DAG visualization based on pipeline template and MLMD. Previously, when we visualize a pipeline run, we only visualize the task as a node in the DAG visualization. But right now, with the introduction of MLMD, we are able to visualize both execution and artifact on the DAG. And then we are adopting the latest visualization technology to help you better understanding your pipeline run. Second one is the SDK change. If you are familiar with V2 compatible, previously we used kfp.v2 when you are importing V2 compatible in your Python code. With the V2 Alpha, if you are downloading the KFP SDK 2.0, you don't need to import kfp.v2 anymore, but directly import KFP. Also, we support defining pipeline route for the data storage path. For example, if your path is on min.io or object storage, any object storage path, you can define that pipeline route for your whole KFP instance. That means that your pipeline route, your pipeline run can read and write data to this route. You can also use that for any S3 compatible and GCS location as well. Also, in each pipeline run, you can define a customized pipeline route. So your pipeline can read and export data to any location. Also, in our KFP SDK v2, we improve our CLI. So if you are trying to run a KFP terminal tool to create run or create pipeline or manage your pipeline run, is now more in aligned with your KFP backend API. It's more intuitive, more understandable, and more lightweight. So all these features are V2 Alpha. We are currently in the experimental page. So the V2 feature here is not fully complete. If you are going to try out our V2 feature, you can use KFP SDK 2.0 beta. Because this is currently in experimental page, the good thing about this is you can continue using KFP v1 with no problem. If you are trying to use KFP v1, you can start using KFP SDK 1.8, which doesn't require any breaking change to your current workflow. If you are trying to understand what is the breaking change for KFP v2, you can look at the link in the breaking change over here to learn more. And there's also SDK reference doc over here. Thank you, and I'm going to hand it over to Tommy to talk about KFP Tecton.
Thanks, Jane. So for this release, KFP Tecton is going to have v1.2.1. This is based on the latest stable release from KFP 1.8, and it's running on top of Tecton 0.31.4. In these versions, we're going to add additional support from KFP caching, metadata tracking, and log archival to the new type of Tecton runtime, Tecton custom tasks. In addition to that, for the Tecton looping mechanism, we added support for index and string separators inputs. So this way, the upcoming KP V2 support also could work on Tekton. And the additional thing we have added is also to enable, multiple drivers able to mount on artifacts volume on top of Tekton runtimes. This way, not only S3 and S3 we are going to support by default, but in the future, not only S3, any cloud provider driver could be added into here, and the artifact could be just using on any like cloud provider volumes. For the fully released nodes, you could check the KP Tekton release tag 1.2.0 for the feature release. So now I'm going to hand over to the Katib communities.
Thank you. So I'm Jorno from Nutanix, leading the training working group and the automl working group. In Kubeflow 1.6, we have Katib 0.14 release and training operator 1.5. So in both, we have added support for the Kubernetes version 1.22 and 2.3. And in the coming release, we are targeting for 1.24. So in Katib, the one major feature that we have added is support for the population-based training, which is very recent and very popular among ML practitioners these days. And we have added more tools for better debugging from a user point of view. So one thing that we have added is the metrics unavailable status. So if the training operator from the training container, if he is not able to generate logs, or if the logs are not in the right format, which is expected as in the spec, it would have the terminal status called that the metrics are unavailable. And we have added more validation checks to prevent mistakes from the user side as well. So in the training operator, we have added Python SDK for all frameworks, including PyTorch, MXNet, and the XGBoost as well. And we have added the Golang client set as well for all the frameworks. And similar to the other frameworks, we have added gang scheduling support for the MPI framework. Over to Kimonas.
Thank you, John. So I'm Kimonas. I'm going to talk to you about notebooks and the components we have under Kubeflow, as well as the manifest working group. So regarding notebooks working group, our biggest effort was Kubernetes 1.22 and stabilizing the repo a little bit and fixing various bugs that I'm going to talk about in a second. So with this release, we fully support Kubernetes 1.22. We've updated all of our packages to the latest version, so we can support the latest version of Kubernetes. There was a lot of work done for a lot of the components, which you can track in the issues. Next up, we had a lot of bug fixes around, first of all, the pod defaults webhook, where we had seen that it would not be picking new certificates after like a month. So now it can keep on running and renew the certificates automatically and pick up the changes, actually. We've had a lot of interesting bug fixes on the notebooks controller. A lot of persistent bugs we've seen even from Kubeflow 1.4 are resolved in this release. Issues with reconciliation, sometimes not adding status, some race conditions, pretty exciting stuff. So feel free to take a more detailed look at these issues to see if you were affected. Quite an important change that this will actually need a heads up to anyone that has custom manifests is that we're updating the container registry that we were using. So previously we were using an ECR registry in AWS, but we were into a migration period in Kubeflow where we're figuring out our CI/CD. So we've temporarily actually switched to Docker. So what this means is for everyone that had any custom overlays on their manifests for updating the images, they will need to use the new images that we have, or else their overlays will be broken. And last but not least, well, this is not actually a feature that we've implemented. We've acknowledged and agreed on a proposal to actually have some multi-namespace support for the central dashboard and how it can pass this information on the web apps below. Feel free to take a look at the proposal, but this is something that we'll be actually implementing on Kubeflow 1.7 and beyond. Next up for manifests, this again was mostly a stabilization cycle, with most important changes being First of all, compatibility from Kubernetes 1.22 from the components that we have for manifest as well, which includes DEX, Istio, Knative. Specifically for Knative, an important change to keep in mind is we've gone with Knative 1.2 and not 1.4 because Knative 1.4 had a limitation and would not work with Kubernetes 1.21. So even though we're advertising a lot Kubernetes 1.22, we're pretty confident that the dependencies also work with 1.20, still work with 1.21. And the rest of the items that we have are actually basic unit tests and actually some early stages of integration tests with some of the components to ensure that all of the manifests can be built, they can be applied in a simple kind cluster, and we can also run some objects to completion. And that's the changes we have for manifest in this release. And with that, I'm going to pass the torch to Dan that's going to talk about KServe.
Yes, thanks, Kanamas. My name is Dan from the KServe Working Group. In this Kubeflow release, we are integrated with KServe 0.8. So in the KServe 0.8, we were focusing on unifying the inference service API for deploying models on KServe for single model, as well as like a model mesh for deploying multiple models at scale. We had a major change, like to introduce a ServingRuntime to KServe for deploying single model. ServingRuntime is already supported by model mesh, which is a concept we introduced to KServe as well for deploying single models. So now we both ServingRuntime are both supported by KServe as well as model mesh. So we can use a single inference service API to deploy both to KServe as well as model mesh. The two new CRDs introduced here are like ServingRuntime and ClusterServing, with the only difference between these two is the one is namespace scoped and then the other one is cluster scoped. So the ServingRuntime defines the template for pods that can serve one or more particular model formats. Each ServingRuntime defines the key information such as the container image of the runtime and a list of model formats that the runtime supports. So in previous versions of KServe, you may know the supported predictor formats and container image were defined in a config map in the control plane namespace. The ServingRuntime CRD should allow for improve the flexibility and extensibility for defining or customizing runtimes to how you see can fit without having to modify any of the KServe controller code or any resource in the controller namespace. Several out-of-the-box ClusterServing runtime are provided with KServe so that user can continue use KServe how they did before without having to redefine the define the serving runtimes themselves. So other major changes are we have a new model spec is introduced to the inference service predictor spec. So this is a new way to specify the models instead of we used to have a hard-coded list of different ML formats on the which is really cumbersome and difficult to maintain. So now you can easily introduce the new model format even for you have your own in-house customized model format. So the next change is we have Knative 1.0 is officially certified by KServe, so you can use KServe 0.8 with any of the Knative 1.0 onwards versions. So we have running all the end-to-end test to certify that Knative 1.0 should be working with KServe 0.8 pretty seamlessly. The next one is we also now we are able to support gRPC for the transformer to predictor communication. So this dramatically improved the performance over we used to default to use the HTTP. gRPC improves the performance for moving large tensors between transformer and a predictor. So from the model mesh side, model mesh has been in the progress of integrating KServe's multimodal serving backend. So with the inclusion of the ServingRuntime CR we just mentioned, so the two projects are now like much more aligned with continual improvements under the way. Model mesh also now supposed to introduce the multi-namespace reconciliation. Previously, the model mesh controller can only reconcile against the resources deployed in the same namespace as the controller. Now, by default, model mesh will be able to handle inference service deployments in any of the model mesh enabled namespace. You can check more details from the release notes. So another item to pay attention is that if you are using KServe SDK to build any of the custom serving runtimes, we have a name change from mainly for for example, the KF model renamed to model and the KF server renamed to model server. So if you are building custom models, custom serving runtimes, these are the breaking changes you need to pay attention. For more details, definitely look at our full release notes and our blog post for 0.8 release. That's I will pass down to Daniel for learn more about the Kubeflow community. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne, and thanks everyone for the details about all the working groups job. So to finalize this, I will just talk about how you can learn more and become part of the community. Please feel free to join the Kubeflow Slack and attend the community meetings on Tuesdays. Get hands-on, run a tutorial. It can be either on pure Kubeflow or using a distribution, and we will be happy to provide some help and assistance with that. Feel free to also submit issues, ask questions. That is very important to keep the communication flowing. Also, if you're interested, please attend the Kubeflow Summit and find all the planning info in the link provided. And I think that would be it. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and thank you again, the working groups leads for your details.